usually introductions kind of go on about your past accomplishments, and it's always so deadly dull. Nobody cares what you did in the past, really. It's only what you do in the future that matters. And I would say that that's true for the cause of liberty, too. I think we have an unbelievably bright future right now. It's the greatest time to be a lover of liberty than there's been in 100 years. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for 50 years ago. How dark and how desperate and despairing it must have seemed half a century ago. Coming out of World War II, the state seemed to have this overweening power, ruling everything before it, all the intellectuals 100% in favor of Leviathan and despotic rule of humanity. The idea of human liberty was at a low ebb. There were only a handful of people that supported it. Mont Pelerin Society, F.A. Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, Leonard Read, F.A. Harper. These names will live with us throughout history as being men of hope. Rose Lane, Ayn Rand, so many amazing intellectuals that were holding up the torch in the darkness. And yet here we are in 2014, and we're so fortunate to be surrounded by so many signs of hope, and to see this wicked apparatus that was created over the last 100 years, this apparatus called the Leviathan State, and their plans for us, systematically come crumbling down in every area of life. My friends, we are living through a massive paradigm change in history, where every day we can wake up and see signs of liberty bursting out and shredding the plans of the central elites and dashing on the rocks this horrible theory that ran the world for 100 years. I take great solace when I read a beautiful book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. Who's read it? I bet lots of people have. Yeah, it's a great book, right? I didn't read it until last year. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit that. I mean, it's one of those books that everybody's supposed to have read, and I didn't read it until last year. But let me give you a little bit of the thesis and why I think it applies to our time. So Kuhn investigated very seriously how science progresses in history. Non-scientists typically think that science proceeds the following way. The objective scientist gathers facts around him, puts them in the laboratory, examines the way they're interrelated, comes up with a theory, and then tests that theory against the facts. And there's nothing but unrelenting progress as information is shared from scientist to scientist. Kuhn said that this is sheer nonsense. That's not the way science progresses. Science progresses in very strange leaps from theory to theory, what he called paradigm shifts. There's a coalescing around one theory of life. This is how things work, and this is how things should work. And the whole scientific establishment coalesces around this theory, and it can persist for 50 years, 100 years, hundreds of years, until strange things begin to happen. There are too many anomalies that are not explained by the theory. Too many things happening that don't seem to fit within the structure of the dominant paradigm. And the paradigm gradually erodes because people don't believe it anymore. And we enter into that great period of struggle, which he called pre-paradigmatic. So this is a period after the old paradigm has failed, but before a new one has emerged. And there's a massive war of ideas that takes place. This proceeds over 50, 100 years, 200 years, whatever it's going to be. And then a new theory emerges around which all science coalesces and it dictates the vision of future research. And these leaps from paradigm to paradigm is how we proceed throughout history. In the course of these paradigm shifts, there's lots of lost knowledge as people irrationally sort of sort of adhere to one view of the world, just so they can make sense of the world. What he's describing is the process of natural science. And as I was reading this, I realized something very important. Everything he says about the structure of science actually applies many times over to politics and to our social theory. We leap from theory to theory. We try to organize the world around that theory. There are too many anomalies that appear. The theory is shattered. We enter into a pre-paradigmatic stage until a new theory has come along. So as we look back over, say, the last 125 years, you can see this is exactly what happened. We lived through a period of relatively laissez-faire in the late 19th century, experienced the highest levels of economic growth in history, incomes rising as never before, money was sound, there was no income tax, there was relative free trade, and wealth was somewhat safe from the looting by the elites. But during this period, an enormous confusion entered into life. Incomes were rising, infant mortality was collapsing. We saw the middle class obtain lifestyles that would have been unimaginable to even the richest of the rich a century earlier, even 50 years earlier. And it was all spectacular. All of the new science, all of the new innovations. Indoor lighting, steel, and plumbing everywhere, and there were experiments in flight, and internal combustion. And the World's Fairs put all of this on display, and the world fell in love with technology, and rightly so. But there was a mistake, and the mistake was believing that science was the mother of prosperity, rather than the actual reality, which is that liberty is the mother of science, and therefore prosperity. That was the mistake. That was the mistake. So, it came time at the end of the 19th century, moving into the 20th century, an amazing thing happened. There were no more intellectuals who seemed to favor laissez-faire. At least there was a lack of enthusiasm for it, or a lack of understanding of it. And about 10 years later, a terrible thing happened. This pre-paradigmatic stage led to a new paradigm. And that paradigm can be summarized in one word: the state. The state could and would rule all things. That was only 100 years ago. During those fateful years, 1912 to say 1915, we saw a civilization shattered, utterly demolished. We saw the invention of the central bank, which socialized money and credit, put it in the hands of government, and said, you manage it, you make it, you run it, because you can do a better job than the free market. We saw the introduction of the death tax, which was essentially a plot to disgorge an entire generation of their accumulated wealth that was then building up massive philanthropy, and it was all looted and destroyed. We saw the introduction of the income tax, which was the great evil. I agree with Frank Chodorow about the income tax. It's the root of all evil, because it's not just about the presumption that the government owns all of our money. It's the presumption that the government owns the whole of our lives. That's what the income tax is. Very, very evil theory, and so much more. And look what they did with the first powers that they gained in those fateful years, 1912, 1913. What did they do? They started a ghastly, total war in which civilians themselves became fodder in the central plan. It was the worst war in history. It started almost inadvertently, almost naively, and it led to the shredding and dismantling of a civilization that had taken hundreds, even thousands of years to put together. And it was horrible. People talk about the Bolshevik Revolution. Yes, it was bad in Russia. That was a bad situation. But it was just the beginning. The theory that the state should know all, manage all, own all, and control all spread throughout the world. It came to its fruition in fascism, in the New Deal, which wasn't that different from fascism. It led to gas chambers and gulags and internment camps and eugenics programs. America had its own homegrown Holocaust. The demographic planning, where forced sterilizations were the norm right here in this country. And it was absolutely terrible. And this persisted for 100 years. That's the very bad news. But the good news in our time, and this is what's wonderful, and it thrills me every day, is that non-compliance has become the norm. No longer is the plan working.